Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Blue Feathered Stories. I'm your hostess, a Blue Thunderbird woman, also known as Carol. Well, our Money Story series continues, and I'm super excited and honored to bring with me today a beautiful guest by the name of Jen Pillipow. And we're going to go deep and share about her money stories and how it has affected her, how it is currently still perhaps having an impact, and what she's doing to change that. And so, without further ado, let me bring on Jen and introduce you to her. And so, welcome, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I just got butterflies in my stomach. I've been listening to the series and I've been healing as I've been listening to the stories. I resonate with so many of them, and I know I'm in good company. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah. Even myself, as I re-listen and I'm editing this particular series, I'm recognizing the power behind them. Like
Mm.
for anyone who's participating as a listener, there's a lot of healing, and really, the intention behind the series is really to bring women together to heal this piece, this money story piece, because we have been wounded with it for thousands of years. And we as women really wrap our self-worth around the money story. So I really feel it's time we're stepping into a whole new world, and we really need to understand how this plays a role in our lives and to look back on how our ancestors have carried this money story as well. And let's just, like, are you done? If you're done, I'm done. Let's heal this once and for all. And so for all of you who are receiving this audio, it's a ripple effect that's being sent out. The waves are like touching all of you, and we are all healing this together. So let's do it. So, Jen, when you think back, you go back to a childhood memory or memories around money, what are the things that you observed? What are the things that you unconsciously absorbed as truth without question? Because that's where we're at as children. What comes to mind?
Yeah, I've got a lot of stories about that. And just as my work as a hypnotherapist, I know that when we're kids, we are fully in our subconscious mind, which is our most suggestible state. So everything that's happening around us and what we're learning about the world and how it works, that is just being programmed in as factual, as just the way that it is. And so when I think about what was imprinted into my mind at that time, it was the story that money is scarce. It's very hard to come by. And when it comes, it goes very quickly. And there's always stress around it. I remember thinking that credit card debt is just like a natural, that's just what happens when you're an adult. Like you just get a credit card and you just always have this debt that you can never get rid of. And that's just a part of life. I didn't realize that other people didn't live that way. And I didn't realize that there were choices or options around that.
Well, it has actually become quite normalized, right? It's
Mhm.
almost you know let and I know that as a child you're not necessarily really understanding this at that point in time, but I just look at the way in which our society has evolved, and the things that we're being taught, if you
Mhm.
will, that is normal, quote unquote, is that the you know the story of what a perfect life looks like uh includes a lot of materialistic things that cost money. And so, in order to let people feel that they're getting somewheres in life, credit cards have been invented, and someone decided that they could charge interest around that. And so because we want that emotional satisfaction of that new dress or that new car or that new house or whatever, we feel that the happiness is in that item, and we then allow ourselves and make a choice to go into debt for it. But what that debt does, it does the opposite for us.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you shared a story about how when you went to university or college and you got your credit card, I did the same thing. I got my credit card with a $500 limit. I racked it up immediately. I don't even know what I bought. And I don't even know why I was buying. It was just kind of like fulfilling this prophecy that you have a credit card now and you must use it and you must be in debt.
Yeah, yeah. I've struggled with credit card debt like all of my life, and I still, to this day, still have credit card debt. I'm really done with it. I'm done with all debt, to be honest with you, but it's hard to get yourself out of it because the way in which that whole system is designed is to
Mhm.
never get out of it.
Yeah, that's the point.
It's totally the point. So, any other memories that come to you as a child around stress and scarcity and all that? Like,
Mhm.
how old
Mhm.
were you when you first got your first job?
There's a lot of stories and memories that come up, and a lot of them are like repeated as I've been doing the work over the years. I started working when I was 12 because that was the age when you could start babysitting. And I remember thinking, I don't really want to babysit. Like, I don't really like kids, but I sure would like to have some money. And so
Mm,
I did that. And then when I was 14, I was old enough to get a job bussing in the restaurant in the town that I lived in. And I did that, and I really liked that. And then I just kept working up until I was 40 and I had a baby, and that was my first real break. And during that time, I was working sometimes two or three jobs at a time. And I just remember thinking how strange it was that it didn't matter how much I worked, that I just never had money. Like
mm,
I would have just enough to kind of cover my car payment and some gas that would get me to work and not much else. And it's such a funny kind of backwards thing when it comes to money. And I guess because when it really comes down to it, it's energy, it's not actually a thing, but it's kind of ass backwards in the way where it's like you think that you have to do all these external things to get it, but it's all the internal work. It's the part of you that thinks, do I value myself? Do I feel like I deserve this? It's that energy on the inside that brings in the money or repels the money. It's not
mm.
so much the external stuff that we do, and we can try to like force ourselves and be on this hamster wheel, but sometimes that makes it worse.
Yeah, yeah, I can actually totally relate to that. You're absolutely right. And that's where I think if we look historically into the money stories, somewheres along the line we have attached or given the power to money that it equates self-worth,
Yes. Boy, do
right?
I carry that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think men and women are slightly different in the way they are driven around that. Um, but even, yeah, that might be a whole other podcast another day,
Mm.
but I'm just sort of
Mhm.
thinking about maybe I'll have to do a money story series with men just to see where they're because I can't really speak for them. But as we listen to some of the other beautiful soul sisters that came on, like it's like if the whoever earned the money in the household was the one that had the power to make decisions.
Yes.
And so I'm
Yes.
curious to know whether on the men's perspective, whether or
Yeah.
not that was a big stress for them.
You should have a conversation with my husband about
Ah,
that
okay, well
because,
maybe I'll get him on next then.
um, yeah, I mean, it is so interesting. One of my biggest healings that I'm still working through is that when I stopped working my corporate job when we had our son, is I fully intended to step into my own business and make my own money, and it didn't replace the money I was making in my corporate life. And so my husband became the breadwinner. And that was a huge shift in our relationship that took me years to get to the point where I'm a little bit comfortable with it now, but I'm still not fully comfortable. And I know that that was a shift for him too, because he was used to me contributing quite significantly to the household. And so I know that added to his stress. I saw it. And that sure didn't help my feelings of worthiness, seeing him struggle with that too. So Yeah, there's a whole element around that.
It's finding the balance of that. And I know
Hmm.
that I haven't shared this particular podcast recording yet, but one of our beautiful soul sisters, who will be coming out probably in a few weeks when I publish it, she was really sharing about the money story. For us as women, we really need a foundation.
Mm.
We need a foundation in order to be rooted into our self-worth, right? In order to really open up and changing the money story, creating a new money story. It really comes down to the foundational pieces of
Mm.
it. That was a really beautiful aha for me as she shared that nugget of wisdom with me. So that's part of our healing is
Mhm.
is really being grounded in our self-worth so that we can open ourselves to the abundance that is truly available to us,
Yeah,
always to
yeah.
us. There's never any scarcity. It's
Yes.
that's an illusion that we've created. That's an illusion that we've inherited, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like it's time to wake up out of that nightmare, if you will, and start dreaming in the destiny that you want to call in.
Well, that's what I think that inner work is, right? It's the deconditioning. It's all those layers that you learned by watching your parents' relationship with money, and they learned that from their parents' relationship with money. And relationship is such a big part of it. Like, what is your relationship to money?
So you started working and you were working many jobs and you didn't seem to be able to keep any money in your hands. Was there anywheres through your younger years experience where you were taught uh, how to save money, how it was
Hmm.
important to pay debt off? Like, were any of those teachings available to you? Did they come in any way?
Not that I remember. I know my mom is going to listen to this episode and she might tell me differently, but everything that I feel that I learned about money was through my subconscious. It was through watching other people's reactions to money and kind of gaining the beliefs from that. It felt like what I knew about it was that it was hard to get and everything was really expensive, and so it left really fast. And you just do your best to try to keep up. You just work hard. You just work as hard as you can
Mm-hmm.
and hope it works out.
Did you feel that money, did you ever at any point in time, just like if there was something you were aiming to purchase or a trip or a travel or something that you wanted to do, was there any point in time in your experience that you just trusted it would show up?
Yes and no. So it's really interesting because like there's these elements of the trust was that I always just trusted I would be able to pay my rent and eat because I had grown up with that. You know, like our needs were always met. We had clothes, hand-me-downs, but we still had clothes. We had a roof over our head. We had food, even if it was sometimes toast. We had food. And so I never questioned that. And I always was able to pay my rent, although there were some years when I did pay my rent with my Visa and just put my check on my Visa and rinse, repeat. And so the other big things like vacations, trips, expensive things just felt like it just wasn't available to me. So I never dreamed, I never wished. I was just like, oh, that's for other people. That's not for me. I'll just make sure that, I just trust that I know that I'll have food and I'll be able to pay my rent. However that works. I'll figure that out. But everything else isn't available to me.
You know, you're actually bringing something up for me. Just the other day, my husband said, you know, Carol, it would be really nice to go on a vacation, rent a motorhome, and go camping, go exploring or whatever. And it's something we sort of talked about over the last couple of years. And what was running through my head as he was sharing this was, yeah, well, we don't have the money for that. Vacation? Yeah, that's not happening. Like, and immediately my neural pathways in their very well run pathways, deeply engraved into my brain, was saying, no, 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 not possible. Nope, nope, we don't have money for that. Nope, 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 that's not practical. Nope, 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 nope. And then I was like, and I'm observing that this is actually happening. Like I'm very much aware that I'm
Yes.
doing this. And I was like, wow, like where is that coming from? Right?
Mhm.
It's just so ingrained in us that the the most important thing, and maybe this is where we come back to being primal creatures, is like the most important thing is to meet our needs, our survival needs. And that is like super strong, right?
Mhm.
Super strong. That reptilian brain is like, we got to make
Mhm.
sure we eat. We got to make sure we got a roof over our head. We got to make sure we're clothed. Like,
Mhm.
boom. And anything else is uh unattainable, only a pipe dream,
Mhm.
whatever. It's like, and so some of us don't, like you said, I don't allow myself to dream bigger
Yeah.
because my primal needs are met, but I don't allow myself to go bigger because, as you say, that's for somebody else who has money. I don't have any, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like we got to
Yeah.
change those stories.
Yep. Yeah.
Like,
And I always like to think about it like a relationship. Like if money was a person and it was coming around and I was like, where have you been? You're never enough. Like, just treating it so poorly. Of course it's not going to be around. No, nobody wants to be around like that. And so as I started to work through the stories, and like you were saying, like you had this awareness that you had these thoughts. So as soon as you can kind of have an awareness that you're having these thoughts, then you put yourself in a choice point. It's like, okay, well, where did that come from? And then you can explore that. And then you can be like, well, what is the actual reality? And and then moving more towards that and
mhm.
changing that relationship with money to be like, thank you for being here. And then when there are times when it isn't there, being thankful for when it was there. And like that's the kind of relationship that I want to cultivate that feels more wholesome.
So is there any other kind of money stories that you want to sort of share in your adult life, or maybe how that actually really changed once you had, a child to take care of? Like, how are those primal needs? Did they switch? Did they amplify?
Mhm.
Like, how did that happen when baby came into the picture?
Like, I think a lot of things started to change just when I met my husband because he is a very different money story. Although we kind of come from like a similar story, he has a very abundant mindset in a lot of ways. And so things had already started to kind of change. But when we had our son and I decided not to go back to my corporate job, I mean, there were lots of reasons to not go back. It was a very toxic environment for me, but I really truly thought I could just go and be a coach and replace my income. And it certainly did not look like that right away. And so there was a huge shock with that. I still felt like even in those years, because we were in Vancouver and it was very expensive, I still felt like we would still have our needs met, and they were. And then our lives changed to make it easier. We moved to Saskatchewan. I don't, so it kind of reaffirms my belief that opportunities will be there to support the beliefs that you have. If you feel that your rent and your food is going to be taken care of, then the universe will give you opportunity to make sure that happens. And so that happened for us. And then I was able to take my business way slower. We have this set point, this thermostat setting, right? And my set point with the way that I grew up was that I would be able to pay my rent and I would have food and I would be able to take care of myself and those basic needs. And that was my set point. And the way that I've moved through and changed that set point to be a little bit more expansive, like we went on a vacation last year to like I didn't think that wasn't a possibility in my mind 20 years ago. So how do we move that thermostat setting so that it's comfortable in a different place?
Mm.
And I think for me, it's what you've already said. It's having the awareness of where that other thermostat setting came from. So I am well aware of my parents' story and my parents' parents' story. And so, for example, my maternal grandmother, who I always feel like we have a special connection with our maternal grandmothers just because of physical bodies because
Yeah.
your mother has all their eggs when they're in the belly of their mother. And so I feel like I lived in my grandmother for a period of time, right? Like
You did.
I'm very connected. Yes, it's science.
Yeah. Yeah. You did.
Yeah. And so like my grandmother has a very interesting story where in the 60s she left her husband and had to go out and take care of her three young children by herself. She didn't have any support. She didn't feel that she could ask her parents for support because she had married somebody they didn't approve of. And so she had to really figure things out for herself as a woman in the 60s. And I think that I learned this maybe in your podcast, where women really only started working in the 60s. And if they worked in the 50s, they had to lie about being married. So that's revolutionary for her to do that. And I remember my mom telling me stories about how the kids would be eating and my grandmother wouldn't eat. And my mom being like, why isn't she eating? Because she'd feed the kids first, and sometimes there was nothing left. So I feel that deeply in me, right? Like money is scarce. You have to work hard. So I knew, because I knew my family's story, kind of where these stories were coming from. And I know from the work that I've been doing over the years, the way that doesn't match up with the universe. That is not the truth of us. Nature is so abundant. I'll tell you a funny story. This might make you cringe, but I'll tell you anyways. When we first moved to Saskatchewan, we got a garden for the first time. I'd never had a garden. I'd been living in a tower for 20 years in Vancouver, right? And my husband did the garden. I remember the first time that we got lettuce, I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is great. This lettuce is very good. I didn't know it grew back. That's how disconnected I was from nature and from abundance and just from myself. I didn't know it just grew back. When that happened, I was in shock, amazed. Like, this is amazing. The everything that we need is out there.
Yes.
But we have so much conditioning and so many layers telling us that we're not good enough, that there's never enough. Everything that we need is scarce. So
Mhm.
many layers and conditioning everywhere we turn. So it is really up to us to look at our stories and give a distance between them and understand that we understand why our parents believe that and why our parents' believe that. We can see that. But we also can understand that we can have some space from that and look at what is really true for us and start to step into that direction and
Mm.
start to move that thermostat.
Yeah, exactly. And this is actually a really good segue because what the audience probably doesn't know is part of how you serve in the world is through hypnotherapy, and part of how I serve in the world is through ceremony and shamanic practices. And one of the things that we have different languaging for it, but we
Mhm.
both do the work, is the ancestral healing. It's actually, you call it cycle breaking, I call it ancestral healing, healing the blood memories. And I think this is a really good opportunity to kind of go there, because I think for those of us that are on this journey of healing this particular wounding, this particular money story, um, perhaps it will be really useful for our listeners to sort of go, okay, I recognize these things that these soul sisters are talking about. How do I really change the story? How do I really step into healing that? Because the mind is so powerful, just saying so isn't doing so, isn't being so, right? So how
Mhm.
do I, if I am my mother and my grandmother, my great grandmother, my great great grandmother, and I have inherited all of these beautiful and harsh cellular memories of their stories, and I'm living them out in the way in which they are for me to step into healing. How do I do that? And so, Jen, if you wouldn't mind, like, let's dive into, because I know you shared with me that you actually prepared your own hypnotherapy recording to help
Mm.
you change that money story. So, like, do you want to share it? Can we like dive there for a few moments?
Sure. Until we're about the age of 12, our minds are fully in the subconscious mind. Our conscious mind hasn't fully formed yet. And that's important to know because the subconscious mind is highly, highly suggestible, spongy. So, like, whatever we're seeing and learning, we're not discerning about what we're taking in. It's just kind of like, okay, this is just the way that it is. And so, when somebody's talking to you, about there's not enough money, you can't get those new shoes, there's just not enough, you just have to wait. it starts to become our reality. And then I did a post about this on Instagram recently, where it was the analogy is like the social media algorithm. We all know that when we like things, the algorithm shows us more of those things. The way that our subconscious mind works is exactly like that. Whatever we are believing, that is what we're going to be seeing in the world reflecting back to us. Anything that you're seeing in the world that contradicts those beliefs, your subconscious mind is automatically behind the scenes. It's going to delete, edit, um, filter anything that doesn't agree with what you believe, because it would be so overwhelming to take in all information at all times. And so your subconscious just looks to verify with what you already know just to keep things moving along. It's confirmation bias. And so that's why sometimes it can feel like we get stuck in these belief systems, because that's all we're seeing. Of course, that's what we believe. When we try to believe something different, we're not seeing the different thing. The way that we can move out of that, so hypnotherapy is a great modality for it, because it's a way to access that subconscious mind, that suggestible part of you, to give it better suggestions, to give it better choices, so that then when you are going out into world, you're seeing beliefs that will match the new suggestions. So, for example, if you grew up with this belief that money is scarce, and then you go out into the world and it's like, yeah, it's really hard to get money, and when I have it, I have to spend it on bills right away. Like, it is scarce, like it's getting confirmed time after time. And then you start exploring, okay, well, where did that belief come from? Oh, maybe it was from my grandmother, who really struggled for a period of time, but I'm not in that situation. Actually, I have different choices, and I understand that money is energy. It's more based on my relationship with that energy, and I can attract it or I can repel it. It actually has nothing to do with how hard I'm externally working. And you start to bring in those beliefs to your subconscious. Then all of a sudden, when you're out in the world, you're seeing those examples. The world is reflecting back to you those truths that you're bringing in. And so that's how you can kind of change that thermostat setting, is through, first of all, having an awareness about what the old belief is, and then allowing yourself space to bring in a new awareness so that you stop filtering out those examples.
Beautiful. Isn't it interesting that social media uses that exact thing?
Mhm. I mean, it's
Like,
it's like, I think you and I were having a conversation at your house recently where you mentioned something and you're like, "Oh, now my phone is going to start sending me ads for this."
and it
Yeah.
does all the time.
Yep. It's listening. It's always listening. Your mind is always listening. Now, the thing that I found about myself is that I couldn't grasp my limiting beliefs about money. I just knew I felt bad about it. So sometimes it's hard to like even figure out like what those beliefs even are. Sometimes we don't have the languaging for it, but we can feel it. We can feel that smallness of it, that disempowered feeling that comes along with it. And sometimes that's a good place to start too.
So then understanding then how the mind works and how the filtering system happens with the subconscious mind, then how does hypnotherapy, which is only one of many ways to
Mhm.
switch things for us, how
Mhm.
how how would that work? Like how can that help us?
Well, the modality that I like to use for this is called RTT, and that's Rapid Transformational Therapy. And what it does is it asks the subconscious, we put you into hypnosis first, meaning we slow your brain waves down so that we can access the subconscious. And then we ask the subconscious to show us three pivotal memories where the root of this began, so that we can, I sometimes I use the analogy of a Jenga tower. You know, when you play the game Jenga, and sometimes when you pull one piece out, the whole tower falls. So the point of this is to get to that one block that's going to make the tower fall, so that it releases any other belief, circumstance, thought, anything that's tied to the root cause of why scarcity is a belief system for you. You release that, and then you talked about making the recording. And so having the recording that you listen to for 21 days to solidify that neural pathway, of all the good beliefs that you want to believe about money, all the truths, the universal truths about money, that it is energy, that we are naturally abundant beings, that everything is there for us, and just like feeding that into the subconscious. And you listen to that for 21 days to write over the old programming. So
Mhm.
another analogy that I like to use is if like you're walking through the forest, like Carol, you're talking about these deeply ingrained beliefs, like deeply ingrained. It's like you've been walking that forest trail a long time. It is well worn. You can see the path, you know exactly where it's going. There's no branches in the way. And then when we do this recording, it's like you are creating that new neural pathway. So the first couple times you walk down it, maybe you're moving trees and bushes out of the way and you can't fully see the path yet, but you walk down that a few times and you can start to see that path. You start to know where it's going to take you. And then that other well-worn path starts to get grown over. And this is the beauty of our brains, right? This is why it's called neuroplasticity. Our brains are plastic. We can change this. We can rewire this. We have this power.
I love it. And I love the analogy of the forest, because yeah, it's like you're going through the jungle for the first time and there's no path. And so you're going to be swatting and, clearing your path. And there's going to be a lot of work in that. And
Yep.
in the meantime, because you're stepping into a completely different path, the old path, nature takes over and grows over and
Mhm.
leaves and it becomes the new jungle. It's like,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
actually really beautiful. I love that analogy. Okay, I'm going to imagine a forest in my brain. I'm going to take a walk, a
Mhm.
total walk
Mhm.
in the new path that I'm going to forge. That's awesome. Really awesome. Yeah, okay, I can really see how that can help. So I know, if you don't mind sharing, personally, you actually were working on your own money story, knowing that you would be having
Mhm.
this podcast, and you did your own work and you did a recording. And so, are you done your 21 days now of going through that?
I need to back up.
Okay,
So my
sure.
money work started probably about 15 years ago. And so I've been chipping away at it. And I had done a hypnotherapy session early on when I first got trained in hypnosis with somebody. You know the layers, right? Like it's layer after layer. And so like start to figure things out. And that's why the work is never really truly done. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to get back to that. I'm going to re-record something for myself just to start to work on that neural pathway again. And I did it a little bit different. I actually did it focused around Trinant and my why around it. Like, why is it so important to me? Why do I want to step into this? And I put all my reasons into this recording with some strong languaging around, making things stick.
Hmm.
And I did this at a time when I was just really stepping into my yes, and I wanted to make it more of like an automatic, like build it into my workday kind of a thing. And so I did that. And to be honest, I did not listen for 21 days.
Okay.
Life got away with me. But I feel like it did its job because now when I get up in the morning, the first thing I'm starting to think about is, okay, what do I need to do with my business with Trinont today? How am I going to show up for that today? Also, like we talk about the algorithm. And so when I did that, I started to be having more conversations that supported me stepping into that work. So the universe showed up. I mean, I remember having a conversation with you in your kitchen about, making Trinont like factor it into your workday. Like, what would that look like? And that was a pivotal conversation for me. And that opportunity was there, maybe because of that recording, because I had primed my subconscious mind to start looking for these examples of where I can get support and help so that I can step fully into it and make it a full yes.
I can totally see the power of that. And, I will include your link in the notes so that for those of who are interested in looking into the power of RTT, then they can certainly jump and approach you around that for sure. When I think of healing the money story, where I go in with how I serve in the world, it's similar but different, and that is through shamanic practices, and it's taking a person into, it kind of like the trance. Really, it's taking them into a very deep restorative state, and I am going through journeying into probably what we call it the lower world, but it's the subconscious mind as well. And I am looking for the ancestors that are carrying the root cause of the stories that they have passed on from generation to generation through cellular memories. And so, because spirit mostly speaks to me in images, when I'm taking a client into that space, I am seeing all kinds of things and I am guiding them into this sacred place where they can have those conversations with their ancestors. And then you, as being in this reality, in the three-dimensional world, and then also having one foot into the spirit world, speaking to your ancestors, you are letting them share. And you also are saying, we're done. I'm setting you free. We're cutting that cord. I'm choosing a different contract. We're going to burn these old contracts into the fire. And I am stepping into something different. So I love the way that, we could just do a podcast on this, but I love
Mhm.
the way in which science and spirituality are so connected.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, there is so much about spirituality that actually is science, like quantum physics. And
Yeah.
then it to me, it's just like we're finally coming full circle because it's like shamanic practices are the original healing practices. And then Western world and all of that came in and we had to find a different way to talk about it and do it, but it's slowly starting to come back around.
Yeah. So getting back to is there any other sort of stories you want to share around money that sort of are sticking out that you would like to share with the audience right now? Anything piping in that really feels that it needs to be talked about?
I think just the relationship piece, because out of all the healing and removing of layers that I did, the most impactful for me was understanding my attachment style. And so, like, how I safely attach to people, right? And my attachment style is avoidant dismissive. So you can imagine how that works for money. So the way that you really need to look into attachment styles, it's a very deep thing to explore, and I'm not going to say this perfectly, but what I know about it is that it is the way that you safely attach to other people. It's the way that you feel safe around other people. And so for me, the way that I feel safe is hyper independence. Like, I don't need you. I will figure this out myself. And that's a safe place for me to be. And so if you take that attitude to money, it explains why for how so many years I was afraid to look at it. I was afraid to see how much I had. I was afraid to see how much debt I had. I was afraid to see how much I was making. I wouldn't keep track of any of that. And when it came around, I would always be like, it's not enough. Like, so, and feeling in that way that I had to figure it out for myself, right? So understanding that part of it helped me to take like the actual tactical, practical things that I needed to do in terms of, okay, I need to keep track of my income. What am I making? And I need to keep track of my expenses. It sounds so basic, I know. But that was a fear that I had, that I couldn't look at it because it was never enough. And so as I started to look at it and pay attention, I started to heal that relationship and then started to be grateful for what is coming in and appreciative for what I have instead of always saying it's not enough. And then I started to make a little bit more money. And money started to come in a little bit more easily and things started to actually change. And so I think understanding what your attachment style is, how do you safely connect to people is a good indication of how you're safely connecting to your money or how safe you feel around it.
I wouldn't even begin to figure out what that is for me.
Oh, there's a quiz you can take.
Oh,
I'll send
okay,
it to
okay, that's good.
you.
Well, if we can find that quiz, we'll put that in the link as well,
I'll
so
send it to
people
you.
can take
Yeah.
that quiz. That would be great. I think it's actually, whether you have a label for your attachment style or not, I do know that when we come into healing our money story, there are two sides of the money story. There is the attraction of said energy, and there's also the letting go, the expense side of said energy, because it flows, it's meant to flow.
Yes.
So I know that for me, a couple of years ago, around my business specifically, and then also I also took it to my personal life, I really had no concept as to, like you, like it's like I had no concept of how much money I was making, and I had no concept of how much money I was spending, both personally and both business wise. And I remember one of my mentors sharing with me, and I may have shared this in another podcast, but it's always good to repeat, is that if you want to attract more money, you have to honor the money that you're making and your expenses, and you need to be aware of what that looks like. End of story. And
Mhm.
so when I made that decision, because I was afraid to look, when I made that decision, I literally created a big spreadsheet and I tracked all my business expenses and my business income. And what I noticed since I started that journey was that every month I would know exactly my profit loss statement. I would know whether or not this month I made money or this month I lost money. And what that did for me was like, it was a really big eye opener because you need to have a handle. You need to respect it. You need to have a handle on it. And what I was seeing for the first time was like, oh my goodness, okay, like this has to change because I was always in the loss, right? And then it's like, oh, well, no wonder personally, there's no money for the vacations, there's no money for this, there's no money for that. Like, it's like, well, yeah, because your business isn't actually earning more than what it's spending. So, for me, it was kind of like a big aha moment. And because I started to pay attention and be aware from a place of neutrality, not from a place of scarcity mindset, it was more like just a matter of fact. It's numbers, it's black or white or red. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what it is, right? And when I started to do that, what I noticed is that through the last couple of years, I went from being in a loss in my monthly profit loss to a profit in my monthly profit loss, right? And so
Mhm.
it didn't happen overnight, but it certainly happened gradually. And I rarely now am in a loss state, which is a completely different feeling, right?
Yeah.
But it's like changing that thermostat again, like you talked about
Mhm.
earlier. It's like I'm changing the thermostat and I am no longer going to be in that hot zone in the red zone. I'm going to go to the cool part, right? Where it's like much cooler and much more abundant. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
actually super important
Yeah.
when we look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really important as an entrepreneur. It's, like I think back to when I was in my corporate job, it was pretty easy to see what was coming in because I would get a pay stub every 2 weeks.
Yep.
But then when you're out on your own, it's just like it's the Wild West out here.
I think at this point, Jen, I just love everything you've shared so far. And I think we're going to come to a wrap up. What, I mean, you've already shared some amazing and beautiful nuggets for our listeners, things that they can do and things that they could shift and how to look at things and their neural pathways and all of that. There's some really good goodies in here. But if you were to just drop into your heart for one moment and you had any kind of piece of nugget wisdom, maybe an aha for you, something that you can share with our listeners that will be of service to them to help them heal their money story, what would that be?
What's coming to mind is to give yourself a lot of grace and allow yourself to start to spot patterns so that you can start to have the awareness. And that's why you need the grace. Like that's maybe some of the hardest pieces is to like recognize what you're doing and to not just to look at money, but to see how if it's a scarcity mindset, like how does that permeate throughout your life domains? Does it feel like there's never enough time? Does it feel like there's never enough energy? What's the story that you're telling around it and see if you can spot the pattern? Because the very first step is going to be like, just like how we were talking about paying attention to what money is coming in and what money is going out. We just need to have an awareness of what pattern is happening. And then we can kind of get into digging into the work of, okay, where did that story come from? Is it serving me? What might the new story be? And all of that can come later. But to take those pauses throughout your day, however you can do it, to start to build an awareness of what the story actually is before you start questioning it, and to give yourself a lot of grace throughout that, because we're a product of the people that we spent time with when we were kids.
Yeah. And we're also a product of society.
Yes, and there's a lot of conditioning happening out there.
And we're also a product of if our education happened through the school system, we're a product of that as well. And we're a
Yeah,
product of television, and we're a product of all kinds of things. And
yeah.
so, I really do feel that coming into an awakening or a spiritual growth is really about unlearning so many things that we learned. It's really about the school of unlearning. It's,
Yeah, that's so true.
yeah.
That is the heart of it.
Yeah, it is. And with that is the money stories, and it's unlearning those money stories. We look at history as something to, and this is what's coming to me right now to share, is we look at history, whether it's the history of our money stories or history in general. We always look at it and go, we should learn from history. But what I find is we spend, and this is a personal opinion, and I'm just going to share it here. We spend so much time focused on the history that, kind of like the social media algorithm, is that we attract the same history.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, are we really learning and giving ourselves different choices, or are we sinking into that
We're
old
repeating it.
choice?
We're repeating always.
Yeah.
And I always
Yeah.
find it really interesting how we celebrate history, and how we're constantly
Mm,
got our foot in the past. And it's not that it's not necessary to recognize, but we're not living there anymore. And
mhm.
so I always find that it's like, if you are aware of in this particular case, your money story, your history on your money story, it's good to recognize it and to honor it, but you got to step away from it and quit looking at it, because
Yeah.
you're going to attract more of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's such an interesting point.
Thank you so, so much for joining me in Sacred Space. It's been really a beautiful honor. I love having conversations with you all the time. You never cease to amaze me how your mind works, and how you share, and the wisdom that you have, and the experience you have with your own profession, and how you serve in the world. So thank you so much. And for the listeners, we will leave some links below for you, things that we mentioned. And yeah, stay tuned. We have for sure another beautiful money story coming. We may have two. We'll see. We'll see what the universe wants us to do. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Jen, once again. And yeah, thanks for being
Thank you,
here.
Carol. You're such a treat. Thank you.